Hi there and welcome to this new P5 Masterclass video to cover how to set up cloud storage for both backup and archive. P5 version 5.5 I think upwards supports cloud services, so you can see cloud service here under backup. Same thing also appears under archive. This allows you to configure cloud services. P5 is compatible with all of these different cloud storage vendors. When we click on New Service, we get to choose from either Amazon S3, Amazon Snowball, which is a kind of service where they send you a disk onto your premises and you copy data to the disk and then it gets migrated back to S3. So it's a fast way of getting lots of data into the cloud. Glacier, which is Amazon's slower, cheaper service, which has slower retrieval times. Generic S3, which uses the Amazon protocol but allows third-party services like Wasabi is one that we're going to look at later. Wasabi uses the generic S3 protocol. Backblaze, which is a cloud vendor in their own right, and Microsoft Azure. So I've got a couple of cloud services that I'm going to show you backup and archive working with today. First one will be Amazon S3. So I've got a bucket here called Archiware Demo, which is currently empty, as you can see here. And I also have a Wasabi account here with a bucket also called Archiware Demo. And this one is also empty as well. So I've got two buckets all ready to go. So what we'll do is we'll first configure some cloud archiving to the S3 bucket, and then we'll configure some backups to the Wasabi bucket, and you'll have a pretty good idea of how everything works at that point. So let's kick off with a new cloud service. And as explained, first of all, we're going to use Amazon S3. Once you choose the provider, you get to edit the name. So we'll call this S3 for archive. And I will now just tap in my credentials to access this bucket. So bear with me a moment. Okay, so that's the credentials provided, and finally you can choose the number of parallel uploads between your P5 server and the cloud service. Sometimes this can speed things up, sometimes it won't make any difference. It kind of depends on the WAN connection that you're using and how fast it is and the latency on it and so on. I'm going to set this to 3 because in this environment I've found that seems to be the optimum. So I'll apply those changes, and when I say this environment, you'll see that the P5 host I'm connected to is called archiware.jpyhosting.com. This is actually running in an Amazon Web Services Linux instance in the cloud. So obviously the bandwidth between this and S3 storage is pretty good because they're both running within the same infrastructure. It's also pretty good to the Wasabi system as well because the cloud Linux instance has lots of WAN bandwidth available to it. So I've created my cloud service. The next thing I need to do is configure cloud storage, and I can do that via the button at the bottom here, Add Cloud Storage. So let's take a look at that. So I'm calling this window a wizard because it allows you to set up various different things all in one go. So as you can see from the intro text at the top, first of all we need to specify the cloud service. We've only got one of those set up so far, so that's an easy choice. Next is the storage pool. So each cloud service is configured much like local volumes on a disk library, except that they're connected to the cloud service as well. So the pool setup requires that we choose whether or not the data that we write to this pool will both be stored locally in the disk library attached to the P5 server, or just in the cloud, in which case the data is first written to the local disk library, and then as it's copied to the cloud it's removed locally, so then your data only exists in the cloud, and any restores will require that the data is copied from the cloud back to the P5 server. So for the archive I'm not going to keep a local copy of my data, and the chunk size, as you can see from this help window here, is the unit of data which is copied between the P5 server and the cloud service. So 256 megabytes is the default, and I would say this is a good choice in most cases, so I would probably stick with this one. It sometimes is worth varying it if you're using something like Amazon Glacier and you want to minimize the number of accesses to the cloud service in case you're being charged for each access. So it'll make sense what 256 actually does when we go a bit deeper into this. The directory where these volumes are going to be stored locally needs to be specified here. And I have a folder already configured called Storage Cloud Archive. So let's pick that one. And then we get to choose the amount of data that we want to, well, basically the amount of storage that we want to make available initially in this pool. So I'm going to pick 1 terabyte, and we'll see what that does when we click apply. So what happens now is a number of jobs are run. Well, there's a pool created, and then the volumes are labeled to accommodate 1 terabyte of storage. So let's have a look in the job monitor. And what you can see here is the labeling running. So we're writing our 3rd volume at the moment, now number 4. And this process is going to do 2 things. It's going to create volumes within P5's volume database. It's going to create those volumes locally within the disk library folder on disk on the P5 host. And then it will also create those volumes in our S3 cloud bucket. And when the job's finished, we'll just have a look and see what the visible effects of those 3 different things are. Job's completed. So first of all, if we look in our volume list, you can see that we have 10 volumes. If we look at the pool, you can see that the capacity of this pool across those 10 volumes is 1 terabyte approximately. And the storage manager that was created to be the home for these volumes, if we look at the details for this one, we can see that we have 100 gigabyte volumes, so each volume is capable of storing 100 gig, and there are 10 of them, so that's how we get to our terabyte. So these volumes exist on the local file system. So if we look in our Storage Cloud Archive folder, we'll be able to see our 10 volumes. And if we look inside the first of those volumes, basically Archiware builds a path, and within that path we create our chunks of data. So this is the first chunk created here. So as we start writing data to this pool, and therefore to the first volume, we will create chunk files within the folder that we're currently looking at, and those chunk files will be growing up to 256 megabytes in size, because that's what we configured earlier. And each time a chunk grows to its full 256 megabytes, it will be copied to the S3 bucket and then deleted locally. So once we run our first job, you'll see that happening. If I look inside of the S3 tab here and refresh it, we'll also see our 10 volumes. And this is basically a mirror of what we see in the disk library. So if we visit 3 folders down, we see the same file that we saw in the terminal window here on our P5 host. So the next thing we can do is go back to the P5 interface, and we will configure an archive plan and archive some data so we can see how this works when we start writing data. So creating a new archive plan, we'll call this S3 archive, and the target storage will be our S3 pool. Target index will be the built-in default archive index, so let's apply that. The only other thing I'm going to set in here are a couple of preview generators, so bear with me a moment. So I've just added video and still image preview generators so we can see previews of anything that we're archiving. And the pool and the archive plan is set up, so let's apply the changes, close that, and let's do some manual archiving. So within here I've got a data share folder where I've got some movies and I've got some images. So to begin with, let's just archive a couple of these movie files and add those to our archive selection and archive to our S3 archive plan. Start the job and monitor while it runs. Let's expand the job so we can see what it's doing. So you can see it's writing these 2 MP4 files. It'll be using the first volume in that pool, and it's going at about 100 megabytes a second at the moment. The detail you can see here is the chunk being uploaded, and when that happens, it wasn't on the screen for very long there, you get an idea of how fast your P5 server is able to communicate with the Cloud Bucket for each of the upload streams that it's working with. So final step is that there are a couple of previews being generated of those two movie files and the job's finished. So there was a 1.5 gigabytes of data written there, and if we go look at the volume list, we can see our 1.5 gig of data exists on the first volume there. If we go to look at where that volume is stored locally on disk, and in fact we're already in the right folder here, volume 10001, if we look in here, we can see that there are the initial file that was already in the folder after the volume was labeled, and we can see chunk number 7, meaning that chunks number 1 through 6 were written but were copied up to our Cloud Bucket and deleted from this folder. The only reason that chunk number 7 still remains in the folder is that so far it's only 54 megabytes in size. So because it wasn't filled up to 256 megabytes, it wasn't copied. Sorry, it was copied to the cloud, but also we keep the local copy because there's more data to be appended to this chunk before it's considered full. And so if we run another job, this chunk will be filled up to 256 meg, and then that version of the chunk will replace the one that was already in the cloud because it's changed, and then we'll move on to the next chunk. So if we look in the S3 bucket, we should be able to see chunks 0 through 7 existing in there. So if I just refresh this window, you see all the chunks exist in here, and these are the chunks that were copied up because they were 256 megabytes in size. So if we were to do a restore of one of those movies, that would require that we download some of the data, some of the chunks from the S3 bucket in order to perform the restore. So let's do that now. So visiting the Restore tab, Archive, look in the index, under Data Share, and we see the two movies that we archived. And if I double click on one, we can see the preview that was generated from the movie, and we can also see up at the top, let's just pause that, this file exists on volume number 10001, which is what we would have expected. So if I want to restore this movie, I'll add it to my restore selection and restore. Let's find a folder to restore to. So I'll restore it to this restore folder here. Hit next. P5 tells me that this much data, one file, and it needs volume 10001, which is online in the disk library, although some of the chunks that make up that volume will need to be recovered from the cloud. So let's start the job and monitor it. And now you can see we are copying volume chunks. You can see 53% of one of the chunks have been copied so far. This won't take very long. Okay, so the job completed, and now what would be interesting is if we look back at the local disk library folder and rerun the last command, you can see that chunks 4, 5 and 6 were recovered from the S3 Cloud Bucket in order to perform the restore. So those chunks were copied back down to the disk library because we did a restore. They will remain there, so they're not immediately removed again. But in our overnight housekeeping tasks, we will remove those chunks so that they are not permanently taking up space within your disk library. The reason they're not immediately removed is because you might do another restore within the same day that requires the same chunks. So it saves having to download things multiple times. Back to the P5 window. What we'll do next is do some backups to Wasabi. So to do this, I'm going to flick back to the Backup tab and add a new cloud service. This time it'll be the Wasabi credentials. Now Wasabi is a generic S3 protocol service, and bear with me while I just patch in the relevant credentials. Okay, so that's done. Let's have two parallel upload streams for Wasabi and apply. Again, I'll test the connection to make sure I got everything right, which I did. Successfully connects. And close. Rather than just leaving the description as generic S3, I'll just edit this and call it Wasabi backup. A bit more descriptive. Okay. So what I'll do now is show you how you might go about creating a disk library and a pool and labeling volumes kind of the long way, so you've got a better understanding of how all these bits fit together. So to start with, I'm going to create a storage manager. This is the storage manager that was created earlier for the archive. So let's make a new disk storage, and I'll choose a different folder for this one. I already created my backup storage folder, which is currently empty, so I'll choose that one. And let's limit space to 20 gigabytes for this one, and I won't yet label because I haven't yet created the pool, and apply. Okay, so if we look at the detail for this disk library 2, I'm going to change this one to be disk library Wasabi, and you can see that my 20 gigs been allocated by 10 volumes, each of 2 gigabytes in size. So there'll still be a number of those 256 megabyte chunks within each 2 gigabyte volume. Apply the changes and close. So the next step would be to make the pool for the volumes to exist in for the backup to Wasabi. So giving the pool a name, Wasabi backup to disk, but assigning the cloud service called Wasabi backup. Again, we get the option to either keep the local copy as a clone of the data, or untick the box, and then, as with the archive, the chunks get deleted locally after they've been copied. So to be different this time, we'll keep the local copy and apply and close. And now that the pool is prepared, we can go back to our storage manager for Wasabi and manually label some volumes into this pool. So there's my 10 slots. Let's make 5 Wasabi backup volumes and label, and look at the job monitor window to see that running. So each volume is created, and as part of that process they're also being created inside of the Wasabi service. So if we look in the Wasabi tab and refresh, we can see the first 2 of our volumes already exist, and each time I refresh this I'll probably see another volume has been created. Back to the P5, back to the job monitor. We're about halfway through, and whilst that's finishing, if we look in the file system on Linux again, so now I'm in my storage cloud backup and I can see my 5 volumes in there, and if we position ourselves inside the first volume so we can see what's happening, so far, another folder, so far we've just got the first 0 chunk, as it were. So what we'll see this time when we do a backup is that 256 megabyte chunks of data will be created in here, created in the Wasabi bucket, but they won't be deleted from disk, so we'll have 2 copies. Should the local copy get damaged, then we would recover the chunks from the cloud. So the cloud is giving you some redundancy in this way of configuring things. So back to here, let's configure a backup plan to back up some data. So we'll call it Wasabi backup and choose some data to back up. So from localhost we will back up in data share the images folder, and this backup can run as an incremental backup every day to the Wasabi backup pool. Apply and apply. So to see this run now, I'll highlight my incremental backup event, start now, and then we'll view the job monitor window to see that job running. So there are lots of JPEGs in this folder, so we can see the speed at which the job runs, and here we see 2 chunks being copied to the cloud. So you can see a percentage each time a chunk is being copied in the job monitor, and also see the speed. So that total job size was 288 megabytes. So that will be 1 and a bit chunks of data that were written both to the local disk library and to the cloud. So back to the local file systems. If we look in this folder now, we can see our data exists across these three chunks. 256 megabytes plus 33 is about the total size of the job, but this time the 256 megabyte chunk hasn't been deleted as it was with the archive storage, because we configured it that way. If we look in the Wasabi file manager and drill down into this volume, we will be able to see the same three chunk files existing within the cloud bucket. So now the data is in two places. It's both here in our local disk library and also in the Wasabi service. So this allows you to configure a backup to a local disk, which is also replicated out to the cloud, which gives you the peace of mind that if you were to suffer any kind of outage or data loss from the local backup storage, everything also exists in the Wasabi storage and you could recover it from there. Okay, that concludes my tour of using P5 with cloud storage. I hope this was useful. Thanks for watching.